this stuff is migrating, it's moving, and it's not reserved for an Islamist ideology, right? And that's what I would say gives me the greatest concern, is that I think we are starting to see a nexus of all of this stuff come together, and socioeconomic and political conditions where it could be employed as widely and with unabashed restraint like you see in Ukraine.
The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not represent the opinions of Ironclad, the Border Patrol, or the Department of Homeland Security.
Welcome to Borderland Narcosis, an Ironclad original and presented by First Form. Don't forget to check out your First Form supplements. I know. You guys will love it. Go check it out at firstform.com/Borderland. Our next guest is Scott Mann. He did 23 years with Special Forces, and after his time, he helped facilitate some of the communication with other individuals, which is known as the Pineapple Express, during the evacuation of Kabul. He has a lot of experience, and one of the things we talked about is what he's working on currently, his book that talks about some of the potential threats in America and things that we need to look out for and be ready for. If you don't mind, Scott, if you give a short kind of bio of your background for the audience so they can kind of know what they're stepping into right now.
Yeah, sure. I spent about 23 years, just under, in the Army, and about 18 of that, almost 18, as a U.S. Army Green Beret Special Forces. With quite a few years in 7th Special Forces Group, work in Central and South America in the 90s, early 2000s, and then pivoting almost exclusively into Afghanistan once the global war on terror started. Retired in 2013 and have been, working veterans advocacy issues, helping our allies get out, and then also just dealing with recovery of our own population of veterans after the war has ended. So, and then maybe the last thing is I do a lot of work in the for-profit, non-profit space around kind of the Green Beret rapport skills of human connection. Like that was what I brought home in terms of a skill set, I guess, was less, the tactical stuff and more, how do you build relationships when there's no trust? And there's both an art and science to that. So been teaching that for about 13 years now.
And if you don't mind, can you explain the Operation Pineapple Express?
Yeah.
Just in short, just because I know there is a question that leads to that. I'd love to just get that out there now.
Yeah. So when Kabul collapsed, a buddy of mine named Nizam, who was an Afghan commando, Afghan Special Forces, and actually U.S. certified Green Beret, was on the run, like many of our allies were in Afghanistan. At the time, I was trying to help him just get a visa and get over here. I'd been out of the game for years, and it was very clear that he was going to get killed. So I put together a couple of guys, SF guys, who knew Nizam in a signal room. We ultimately were kind of his digital lifeline, like a lot of groups were at the time. We didn't know it. Everybody was kind of doing this simultaneously. And Nizam, after about a 5-day period, was finally able to get through using a password that we secured for him that was Pineapple. And we started calling ourselves Task Force Pineapple. And then over the next, 6 days or so, we grew to about 120 veterans and intelligence alumni, and we basically leveraged the sewage canal, a 4-foot hole in the fence, and some guys from the 82nd that we called the Pineapple Express to move hundreds of Afghans and their families, Afghan allies and their families through. And that became a book, Operation Pineapple Express, and became the nonprofit that I lead today called Task Force Pineapple.
Which, crazy how small the world is in special operations. I was involved in some of the conversations of trying to help use my networks in connection, some of transport and stuff like that. So, which was fascinating that now we connect, and I was involved in some of these signal chats and like trying to help. And so it's pretty wild to hear the whole thing kind of come about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the one thing I would say too, to people watching this is, even for me, like it was staggering how many veterans, first responders, others jumped into the fray. And you don't realize how much in a 20-year war you became accustomed to decentralized operations using remote comms, like using collaborative comms, and how much you can get done just in a flat landscape like that. And it was on full display, I think, in the Afghan evacuation, where so many of our allies were on the run, and you had all these veterans just jump in there, and it was a self-organizing system that I would submit even today has led to the rescue of, people in Haiti, hurricane relief in Western North Carolina, the fires in West Maui.
Yeah.
And could even play a role in the next homeland attack, I think.
Yeah, I think even when there was some of the Russian-Ukraine stuff was happening, the same chats were starting to call for body armor and different things. Even in Israel, the whole same exact thing. So the same communication system that was used during the Pineapple Express era is still active in Signal, with groups connecting for different resources and whatnot, and which is just fascinating. And it's kind of cool how the community learns to find a way, right? We have our own network in a sense to make it happen.
I think we do. Very quickly, I'll tell you, we stood the Pineapple Room back up a couple of times. Fires of West Maui, Hurricane Helene in Western North Carolina. And I remember in one instance, a pastor in Western North Carolina came up on the net and said, all the first responders are out of Narcan. We have a real problem here, as you can imagine. Within 45 minutes, there was a pickup truck of Narcan heading from Atlanta north and dropped off a bunch of Narcan and saved a lot of lives. And then, super ironically, when that hurricane Milton came through Florida, Nazam, the very guy that we had stood this room up to help, now owns his own tractor trailer, came up in the same signal room and said, this is on the eve of the hurricane hitting, "Sir, I'm outside Tallahassee with an empty truck. Where do you need me?"
Beautiful. Yeah, it's incredible what you guys have been able to do, what the community does in a time of crisis. And I'm really excited for this interview. And I think it's going to have a perspective that we don't often get here on the show. So thank you for your time.
Of course.
So you've operated on some of the most violent environments, the volatile areas in the planet. Based on your Special Forces experience, how would you characterize the Mexican cartels' terms of organization, capabilities, and operational sophistication? Are they closer to the insurgents, criminal networks, or something new altogether? Is this something that you've seen already in Afghanistan, or are you seeing the cartel and like, man, there's a whole different world that you're not seeing, that maybe it's something that from your experience you can help us with?
I'll caveat by saying that, I mean, you're right. My depth on Mexican cartels explicitly is nowhere near yours or others that would probably listen to this show. However, dealing with cartels a lot in Colombia when I was in 7th Group, and considering the narco terror nexus, right, that happened in the 90s, I think gave way to a lot of what we're seeing today. Because the thing is, when you talk about tactics, techniques, and procedures, TTPs, I mean, the migration of TTPs has reached an acceleration point right now, for example, that I don't even think we just talked about Signal and how fast information is shared. I mean, the same happens with the cartels. The same happens with self-organizing asymmetric terror groups. And what I would say, the one thing that gives me serious pause about the Mexican cartels, for example, is that I do think we are on the edge of a nexus of TTPs that is unprecedented. Stuff coming off the battlefield in Ukraine, stuff that groups like ISIS are coming up with in the Middle East and North Africa, I think are now making their way into the hands of Mexican cartels. And we're just starting to see the experimentation and implementation with this. And the thing I would throw out, this is, me putting kind of my SF, risk mitigation hat on. You take the gloves off with these cartels and all of a sudden they become a vetted target. Then the pragmatic reasons for them not employing those TTPs against us over the last couple of years are now gone. right? And what you could see is, a full-on implementation of that in the homeland, certainly, in the border regions, unlike anything we've seen. And this is kind of the thing that I worry about in talking with our Afghan allies and still, getting feedback off the battlefield in far-flung places like rural Afghanistan, is that this stuff is migrating, it's moving, and it's not reserved for an Islamist ideology, right? And that's what I would say gives me the greatest concern, is that I think we are starting to see a nexus of all of this stuff come together, and socioeconomic and political conditions where it could be employed as widely and with unabashed restraint like you see in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think that's always a concern of mine. Someone who's worked in Afghanistan and Iraq, learning so much about the Muslim extremist mindset, right? This least this God kind of given ideology of where they're driven for. And it's so different from the cartel. It's not the same. They're power and financially driven. And that makes things, to me, a lot different than how we approach these things. But also, it becomes the issue that we face daily is who is corrupt and who isn't. And that becomes an extremely challenging thing to fight. Like, how high is corruption? Potentially all the way up into our own government. We don't know. But we know Mexican government is very corrupt in a sense, and also very shaky on who is and who isn't. And so that makes things very challenging. From your special forces brain, I think it's fascinating. Those who probably don't know much, special forces usually goes into these countries and works with the population and have them help them become a stronger group to fight against whatever whatever's oppressing them, if you will. From the special forces mindset, is there some kind of perspective that you'd like to bring to this in how you compete against a cartel? It's someone who you might not know is cartel or is associated or who is corrupted by them right now. What are some of the things you can think about just off the top of your head on how do we as a country fight that?
Well, I can draw back on Colombia and Plan Colombia during the 90s, when special forces and other advisors, combat advisors, were working in that country. It was a whole of nation approach to building out a partner nation capacity that would enable them to really take it to the cartels. Now, remember at the time that I'm talking about here, there was a despeje, a demilitarized zone in Colombia the size of Switzerland, and a general reluctance for Colombian forces to get outside the wire. And so this was a multi-decade endeavor to build a partner nation capacity, like you described with special forces, where we work by, with, and through, in this case, formal partners, Fuerzas Especiales, the Lanceros, others who had a charter to really take it to the Colombian cartels and other narco terror groups, but not necessarily the capacity, right? And so I think when you start talking about, again, and I'm going to stay away from the ideology, like you said, and the corruption, because I just don't think I'm qualified to speak on it, and I don't want to talk out my ass. Like I want to keep it around the TTPs and the migration of capabilities and thinking about things like that. When it comes to Mexico, and our foreign internal defense is going to have to be really, really solid, and we're just ramping that up under this administration. And the thing that kind of concerns me is for example, if you name cartels as, a terror group, and they are now a viable, legitimate target, they're an enemy of the state. My concern is that, okay, as you do that and you ramp up for that, if you just do that for 4 years, your ability to actually build partner nation capacity to go against that is pretty minimal. It's going to take some time. In Colombia, we've been in Colombia working there for decades, close to 50 years that it has taken us to work with that country to the point that they can insert at night, put troops on a target at night, and do surgical strike unilaterally. It has taken decades to build that capacity. And to think that you're going to build that in 4 years, something like that in Mexico, I think is a pipe dream. It's going to take longer than that. So that would be the thing that I'm thinking about is capacity building. It is going to take some time, and it's going to take administrations getting over themselves and getting past their own political infighting or this, this comprehensive desire to undo what the last administration did, right? Yeah. And just erase everything. Because then what happens is you're starting to put advisors at risk. You're starting to put people in the mix at risk because you've just erased 4 years of work. So that's my thing is, do we have the internal multi-party desire to stay the long haul on this, and actually build a coherent fight against Mexican cartels? Because it's not going to be unilateral. It's going to be by, with, and through. And that takes time.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, because I think Mexico goes every 8 years and we go every 4 years. This is where we change or potentially change our political leader. And yeah, if in the next 4 years, if someone else comes into office that doesn't agree, then that changes. And yeah, it's almost impossible to kind of maintain any kind of movement or progress, if you will. Talking TTPs, I think about, there's still this extremist ideology in Afghanistan or in some of the Middle Eastern countries that don't agree with America and our beliefs and our way of life. We know that. We've seen this just recently with Iran and some of the things that are going on in the media. But during the whole Pineapple Express movement, was there some kind of process where you had to confidently identify these individuals to be allies before we would bring them into this country? And the only reason I ask that is because right now we're finding that, during the Biden administration, obviously a massive influx of illegal immigration. And in that, we were finding every country you can think of. A lot of the countries that were not, allies with us, a lot of those countries we know, have nefarious reasons for coming to this country, and that's my next question after that. But, what was the process you guys did for trying to kind of decipher who was allowed to come into the country and who wasn't?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at a high level, when you think about the way the withdrawal went down, there was almost no vetting that went on. I mean, the administration, the Biden administration, and frankly, members of our military, including General Milley, bragged about it being the greatest airlift in American history. Airlift of what? Airlift of 100,000 people that, for the most part, we have no idea who they were. And that's the truth. Like, for the most part, we don't know who those people were. And we still don't, which is extremely alarming. And we are getting, but here's some things that I can tell you is that within that, though, the veterans groups, at least the ones that I know of and spoke with, when, and I'm not talking about like what Tim Kennedy and those guys did where they went over there, like that's their thing. I'm talking about veterans who for the most part had friends in trouble and used signal platforms to basically facilitate responsibly presenting highly vetted combat partners to young Marines and paratroopers who were looking at a sea of faces and certificates of appreciation and had no idea who was who, right? So we felt like our value proposition within that whole cluster was that we knew who these allies were, many of them. We knew where they were, and they trusted us to help them move tactically and present them responsibly at right time, right place. And the way that we knew them was that these were individuals who, at least for the most part, we had fought with. Like we could a shepherd, the only way you could come into the Pineapple Room, for example, was if someone else vouched for you in that room. And the only way that we would work to move people through was if a shepherd, as we called them, could vouch for the Afghans that they were responsible for personally on the phone with. And so, was it like 100%? Hell no, everything was falling apart. Like it was complete chaos. But that was our mechanism to say with certainty to the people at the wire, hey, like we know these people. And we were presenting baseball cards with, data, where they had served, that so that the people on the wire could verify with target data, like this is who this person is. They had to bona fides, the whole thing, challenge and password. And so for the most part, I mean, I think that we could say with certainty that at that time, the people that moved through were vetted from our group. Now, fast forward, 3 years, 4 years, where that same commando is living in a Motel 6, right? And then he moves over to, some flat in Albuquerque. And I'm just pulling that out randomly. He's driving an Uber, and his family over in Afghanistan is captured by the Taliban, and they get a Marco Polo or a WhatsApp video of them at gunpoint. Can that commando be turned? 100%. Has that happened? I think it probably has. So I think we're sitting on something that is concerning. And at a high level, the larger influx of Afghans that came over on the airflow, I think a lot of them, we don't know who they were. And I think some of them were planted by ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other groups as deep cover operatives and took advantage of the exfil. Others, much smaller numbers, may have been turned through coercion of their families and such, or just frankly, frustration with the system. It's possible. Most of the ones that we brought over, we stay in touch with, and we have to frankly help them resettle. So I feel pretty confident in that, but there's a much larger number, Vincent, that's unaccounted for that just flooded in when the gates opened.
Hey guys, I want to give a shout out to a company I've trusted for over 11 years, First Form. They make high quality supplements, protein powders, vitamins, performance products, everything you need to support your health, fitness, and recovery. Look, my weight goes up and down like a lot of us, but when I'm dialed in and focused on my health, these are the products I trust. Their Formula 1 protein powder is my go-to after every workout. Cinnamon Toast Crunch, hands down, is my favorite flavor. I use it after every workout and it tastes amazing. They have other flavors too, like salted caramel, red velvet, and chocolate mint cookie. Not a protein shake person? No problem. Their protein bars taste like candy bars, and my favorite flavor is cookie dough. All the First Form products are made here in the US. No junk, no sketchy ingredients, no BS. Orders over $75, ship for free, and if you don't love it, they'll actually give you 110% of your money back. Go check out firstform.com/Borderland now.
And I imagine there's probably a small percentage of the number that might have came here for nefarious reasons that get here and decide this place ain't so bad.
Probably. It's possible. Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Yeah, sure. But, the other thing too is I mean, I think that's true. I mean, that's a possibility. But, there's been 4 years, man, of just no border, north or south. And look, I would tell you, it's not just the Taliban that shot that gap. I mean,
yeah, no, exactly. That's the Iran. What did they say? They said that they might have to contact some sleeper cells, right? Like just the thought of that alone is like, wait, you have sleeper cells here? I mean, any of us in kind of the special operations space can already kind of understand what happens, seeing how the border was wide open, seeing the different demographics and country that came through that border. Those of us who think that way already know there's a potential for that threat to be there at a high level of that. But, right now we haven't seen much activity in that sense. I believe it's a sleeping giant, but hopefully it's not.
Let's just flip it for a second. Let's just say that North Korea, for whatever reason, a hostile regime to the United States, for whatever reason, North Korea had political turmoil, and for 4 straight years, it was openly known in the West that their borders, north and south, were completely open. What would we do? You wouldn't overtly assault North Korea, but would you infiltrate? Would you establish some kind of, presence in this country that is an overtly hostile regime to what you stand for? Of course you would. You would send your best and brightest subversive assets into that country, and you would tell them to wait. You'd put them to sleep. To think that has not happened here at scale, with a variety of non-state and state bad actors, is deluded. It is a level to me of hubris that it's amateurish, honestly, to think that like that hasn't happened. I mean, just as an assumption, just as a general planning assumption, in a way of thinking about the world that we live in. Like the fact that's not front and center in how we're thinking, and what it tells me is, for example, and the reason I don't think that is permeating through our national psyche for Homeland Security is, if that's even remotely true, like if just a fraction of what I just said is true, it's far larger in scale in terms of institutional paralysis that anything in our institutional government could handle if it were a determined, bottom-up kind of asymmetric application, which means the communities, take October 7, for example, like, there was a real paralysis that occurred where communities and individuals were having to handle things on their own for prolonged periods of time. And I just don't think, I don't think it's in the lexicon or the grammar. That's why we wrote the Gathering Storm book. A bunch of us just felt like, wow, there's things that are being said, but from our Afghan allies that are still behind enemy lines that are not being considered in Homeland Security right now. And this is going to affect our communities.
Give me an example of one of those.
Yeah. The former head of Afghan intelligence is saying that there are 1,000 deep cover ISIS and Taliban operatives in the United States right now.
I guarantee that. Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
And there are multiple reports that the sons of Osama bin Laden are not indeed dead, but in fact running Al-Qaeda. Our intelligence community says they're all dead. They're not in charge.
So when did you guys write?
It's called The Gathering Storm. It came out not that long ago, a couple months ago. And it was the whole thing. The whole book is basically, it's two things. It's former intelligence analysts taking what they're hearing from their Afghan partners about the threat that's here in the homeland and what they believe is an emerging homeland threat. And then I did, with a group of other special ops lessons learned guys, we did case studies on 9 localized complex attacks that have happened since the DC sniper, the Beslan school siege, the Mumbai attacks, October 7, the Mandalay Tower shootings in Vegas, New Orleans on New Year's Day. I took 9, and because the reason I did that was that most of the folks that I know that are former intel analysts that are still talking to Afghans, they are saying that the next attack on the homeland is not going to be a September 11 World Trade Center kind of attack, spectacular in nature. It is going to be more of an October 7 local, complex series of attacks where we live, work, and play. And it's going to affect communities much more than it's going to affect, larger pieces of infrastructure or institutional value in the United States, like you saw on 9/11. And so that got me to thinking was, okay, well, if that's remotely true, so like if the next attack on the homeland came locally from people that had come across and then struck us where we live, worked, and play, what can we learn? What can we learn from past attacks? And what are the TTPs for terror groups these days? Are they the more spectacular attacks, or are they indeed these local complex attacks that achieve institutional paralysis? I think you can figure out which one it is. It's the latter, and it's terrifying how fast these techniques migrate, how much they learn from them, and how much we're even starting to see them. I mean, we don't know the ideology of the guy yesterday, but the brush fire that was used as an ambush that then was leveraged for sniper fire against 3 firefighters. Inspire magazine has been talking about, Al-Qaeda magazine has been talking about using wildfire as a weapon for years in its glossy magazine for homegrown terrorists. In fact, it even cites the Australia fires as a case study for how to use fire as a weapon. And nobody's talking about it.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, and so let me pivot to this book real quick. So, yes, anything in the Homeland Security space is interesting to me. It falls in line with the show because the lack of border security has caused a lot of threats, but it's opened up the cartel. It made all kinds of things different. But have you guys tried to take this? I, I know. I mean, either way, you guys have tried to get this kind of information to higher ups in Homeland Security, and for some reason it falls on deaf ears. Correct?
Both administrations. We've tried to share this at very high levels. It's been received some in this current administration. I want to be fair. Like it has been received some. And honestly, I was so exhausted after the last 4 years, Vince, of basically working this problem set and trying to like take it to the highest level. We made one more run at it with this administration. And when I went up there with it, I just said, you know what, like, this is it. I'm going to lay it out for you. Here it is. Have a good time storming the castle. Like, I can't, I'm going back to my life, going back to advocacy for veterans, our play, here it is. And then the other thing that our little nonprofit Task Force Pineapple did was, okay, the real recipients of this, if it goes down, if we're even remotely right, are going to be the communities. It is going to be state, local, and communities that are going to bear the brunt of this. Like the federal government, we've honored our duty to warn as veterans. We did that. We laid it out there. But it's really the communities that, if you just look at the attacks of October 7, if you look at Mumbai, how 10 specially selected Lashkar-e-Taiba, LET surrogates for Al-Qaeda locked down a city of 19 million, with hundreds of casualties for 10 days. It's or the Crocus City Music Hall in Russia just recently, where ISIS attackers went in there and caused horrific casualties, even knifing people on camera. I mean, there's a real migration of these localized complex attacks that far exceed how we train for things inside the United States right now. Look at the use of concerts of late, right? For creating mass casualties. Look at the Beslan school siege. I mean, something that we can't even bring ourselves to think about. I mean, a mass shooting at a school is bad enough with a single shooter, which is mostly what we train on. Imagine 10 highly trained shooters that can go in and not only lock the school down, but move everybody into the gymnasium and hang explosives from both goalposts or in the gym, off the basketball goals, and lock and hold terrain for 10, 15 days. And if they did that across 3 cities, you're talking institutional paralysis on a level that we're not even remotely prepared to deal with. And if I'm sitting here, Arkansas redneck is saying this, who hasn't had a security clearance in 10 years, then, where does it stand at a community level? And I can't tell you, Vincent, how many JTTF, Border Patrol, retired and active duty agents are reaching out to me going, dude, you're right. Like, y'all are right. I mean, that's where we are. Keep going. But they can't even say it. They can't even say it publicly, So that's why we wrote it. You won't find a single author in here because of threats to the folks that didn't even want to put their names to it. I'm the only one that put my name to it. All the proceeds go back to our nonprofit, but the whole thing is designed to give communities and citizens some insights into what the GWAT veterans are hearing coming from our Afghan allies post-withdrawal, and that we ought to be thinking about for Homeland Security.
What's scary to me about the borders that were open for those 4 years and the 15 to 20 million, the rough number that we throw out there that came across, is that nobody comes across without the cartel's approval. They're getting paid. And what's wild to me is how many Chinese nationals and Afghan, Iraq, Pakistani, I mean, you name it, all the countries that are known to not like American way of life has come across, which makes me always concerned. And what bothers me about that is the cartel knows that, and is there in some way, shape, or form, I think, wants the chaos of America, because I think they then have almost free reign to America, almost like distract them here, move here kind of concept. Is that you? Is that, am I wrong in thinking that? And just strategic?
No, I think from a strategic mindset, I don't think that's off. And if so just kind of think about it this way. Let's take ISIS-K. All right, let's take one group. Take ISIS-K. and whose ideology we can barely even comprehend at a normal American level. We cannot fathom the depth of violence that these individuals will go to advance their multi-century narrative of a modern day caliphate. They will go to lengths of violence that we can't even fathom. I mean, other than the dudes and dudettes that fought them, right, and saw firsthand what they're capable of, for the most part, like, there is no resident understanding of what those individuals bring to the table. Okay. They have already demonstrated just in recent months their ability to strike in the heart of Russia, right? They can pretty much strike anywhere they want, you know, and we've left the border open for 4 years. They have, and I even talked with the leader of the Afghan National Resistance, Ahmed Massoud, man to man. And we talked about, you know, what is in store for the United States. And his father is the one that tried to warn us about 9/11 before bin Laden killed him with a suicide bombing on 9/9. You know, so this is a guy that's in the know. And he said, Scott, look, you know, the Taliban learned a lot from the global war on terror. Al-Qaeda learned a lot from the global war on terror. You're not going to see their fingerprints on the next one. You're going to see ISIS. They're young. They don't care. They welcome an apocalyptic response from the United States. They have no reason to fear any kind of response from us, right? So if you just take away, if you just add will and capacity alone to ISIS, and then take, I don't know, the Mumbai model, where 10 LET members they went through their own selection, they were trained, they did maritime infiltration into Mumbai, and a city of 19 million, they locked down for 10 days, right? So just take those two things, combine them, then you have a cartel. You're right. What are they great at? Moving men, weapons, equipment, and commodities across a border. Like, that's their thing. That is their system, and it's a good system. And, you know, by moving these commodities, say, you know, ISIS-K operatives across the border, is that in their best interest? Look, I would say there's an argument to be made a year ago that you would say, if they could do it with plausible deniability and maintain their operation, yes. I mean, because they're sowing discontent and disruption, and, you know, it's a crapshoot. But now that they're an enemy of the state, right? Now that they're a valid target threat, and oh, by the way, they're on the same target deck as ISIS.
Yeah. Punishment's the same.
Then why is a nexus out of the question? What would stop them from, you know, not doing this, right? And that's where, again, I kind of look at it in when you put it together, just from an analysis perspective, I'm like, damn, doesn't seem like we're having conversations at state, local, and community levels that would reflect the magnitude of this evolution of events.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're saying that the fact that they're now designated at the same level with ISIS, then why wouldn't they partake in support of them if it made sense for them? Like, there's no fear anymore. It's the same punishment whether they're in or out. If they get caught, they get caught.
Yeah, especially if dudes start blowing up in Mexico, right? If targets start coming on the deck, and, you know, I don't know, JSOC is taking them out or whatever, and I'm not siding my position on it one way or the other. I'm just saying, when that starts to happen, you know, what do you have to lose in terms of, I mean, you're actually being targeted now. Like, your leadership is being targeted. It's kind of the same thing with, like, IRGC, right? I mean, Iran. Because people are asking, well, if you have Iranian operatives, would the sleeper cells be activated? Well, I mean, the way I kind of think about it, putting my Green Beret on, is, well, if the mullahs are still in power and they need to retain power at all costs, and some level of reduction has happened in their nuclear capacity, but they're still in power, would they risk, you know, a complete Trumpian response that would, you know, level them, you know, scorched earth for some sleeper cells? Probably not. I don't think so. But would that pragmatism go out the window if mullahs started disappearing and the regime was, you know, 48 hours from collapse? Would they wake those sleepers up?
Yeah.
I think they would. I think they would. And I think you would see a whole, and the point is, regardless of the ideology or the lever that gets pulled, what I think we're going to see is a manifestation of capability at community levels unlike anything we've ever seen here. And we're not ready for it. We're certainly,
Break that down for me a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Well, let's take drones, for example, right? I mean, just look at the employment of drone technology. And I'm not talking about recon drones. I'm talking about surgical strike. I mean, look at Ukraine and what has happened with drone technology and how distributed it is, how decentralized it is. I mean, you can no longer evacuate a casualty off the battlefield, for God's sakes, because they've got drones that loiter and will actually hit the medical vehicles, right? I mean, so the golden hour of evacuation, as far as we know it in warfare, is gone. It's gone. Like the ability to get a soldier off the battlefield that you and I did, that's gone. I mean, like, it's been reduced to nothing because now they have a persistent eye that can stay up there. And it's so distributed, Vince, and they're able to strike, pretty much anywhere, and with a persistent eye. And it's like we're not even really paying attention to this. It's almost like we think the oceans will keep that from us. And to me, when I look at like 9/11, what was it that we were strategically surprised on 9/11? That was a terrible thing. We were strategically surprised. We were caught with our pants down. And we said never again. And for 20 years, we worked to keep that from happening, strategic surprise. But honestly, I think we're on the cusp right now of another strategic surprise. And when I see how Ukraine deployed, for example, those trucks with the drones in the trucks, and all they did was park proximity to the airfields, and then boom, they popped out. You're telling me the cartels couldn't facilitate that kind of delivery of a vehicle across the southern border?
Absolutely could. Absolutely could.
So then the question becomes, okay, then the only question really remains is, would anybody be willing to pull that trigger and risk the kind of response it would engender from the United States if we had our own October 7th? Because we would bring Scunyon. But all I'm saying is there's enough groups out there right now that would absolutely be willing to risk that, and frankly would welcome it. And ISIS is certainly one of them.
The southern border doesn't just separate the United States and Mexico. It also splits political alliances, ideologies, and sometimes even families. And decisions about immigration, addressing cartel violence, and the border often dictates who will hold the most powerful positions in the world. But what if there was a resource that could cut through the background noise and give perspective from the front lines of the border crisis? I am Vince Vargas, former Army Ranger and Borstar operator, and the host of Ironclad's original podcast, Borderland. I am also the author of a groundbreaking book called Borderland that reveals the untold story of America's first line of defense and special operations of the United States Border Patrol. In the book, I give an inside look at the U.S.-Mexico border through events and life-changing experiences that I took part in during my years of service. I break down the distinct difference between border security and immigration policy through real-world scenarios and insights only available from the front lines. My goal is to counter misconceptions and misinformation about the highly volatile stretch of North America that connects the U.S. and Mexico. So head over to wherever you buy books and pick up a copy today.
In this time right now, it just seems like things are just so crazy and unstable, and just the immigration conversation creates so much division, and you have so many people that are that live in America that are questioning American beliefs,
right?
More and more, and from the massive amount of influx of illegal immigration, but also the cultural kind of blending of confusion, whether you assimilate too much or not so much. And I'm American, this country was on stolen land. Like, this whole conversation that's so complex and people argue, that creates this division. You have Americans that don't necessarily see eye to eye on the Constitution or the patriotism of a country. So then it makes our country a little bit weaker and whether we'll stand together in certain different conflicts, and which makes me concerned.
I'm actually more concerned about that than I am any kind of external threat. And here's why. Bad actors who have game know that if you want to destroy a country from the inside, right, all you have to do is divide its population, right? That's for example, special operations right now looking at Iran. They're not looking at Iran as a homogeneous society, right? They're looking at Iran as a country that has connections with Azerbaijan, as a country that has connections with the former deposed Shah, as a country that has connections with Sunni Arabs, and connections with Hazaras in the Western Afghanistan. There are all of these different levers that could be pulled, right, to mobilize from the bottom up certain populations against other populations or against the mullahs. I mean, this is pretty much true in most countries. But what has always kind of kept America together, most social scientists would tell you is we have trust in our neighbors, we have trust in our institutions, and we have myths and stories that bind us. How are we doing on those these days?
Not very good.
No. And so what it's created is what General Mattis referred to as tribalism here in the country. I call it shadow tribalism, because we are behaving in a tribal way, like what we saw in rural Afghanistan, but we think we're sophisticated and we think we're beyond it, right? But the reality is these dopamine dispensers that we walk around with, and frankly, the divisionist leaders in politics, both sides of the aisle, they are fomenting division of in-groups and out-groups in order to advance their narrow agenda instead of a stronger, broader nation. And this is the part probably to me that's the most terrifying, because if I was an SF guy, looking at America as the work that I had in front of me, I'd be giddy right now. I'd be giddy, because the reality is we are so factioned and we have so many ins and out groups. It's a picnic, honestly.
Yeah. I consider myself kind of an expert in communication and watching how, my background with psychology, my background with PSYOP, I've watched the media, the narratives, these things being used to really create more division, the lack of education on some people's parts who just don't really understand. And then they still fight something they don't understand. Right. And that's become really interesting to watch. And I think the most interesting for me is the fact that a lot of the conflict on these borders are between Hispanic Americans or with roots to Mexico or other South American countries, which makes it a very challenging topic for them internally with their families, externally with their friends. And it becomes this very oh man, and our society in America is a very heavy Hispanic population. And when you start getting that community, not just confused, but angry, man, you start really ruffling feathers of a major part of America.
You do. You really do. And the reality is it is a complex conversation. And the thing is, what defines our country, Vince, in my assessment, is that we're a country that has mostly operated on civil discourse and respect, at least enough to advance our ideals and how we navigate the world. But that civil discourse has given way to a trance state. Most Americans today are operating in a trance of fear and anger. They're in a sympathetic state, fight, flight, or freeze all the time. And they're agitated. Their emotional arousal is such, like, for example, you just cited a lot of the Hispanic narratives that are out there. They're very real, right? And they're very local narratives, and they run deep. And I think the challenge to today's leaders, when I look at national, state, and local politicians, the thing I say to them is, look, I would be a lot more concerned about how we treat each other with these issues than the issues themselves, because what's going to be exploited in the 5-meter target with bayonets is not the issues. It's how we treat each other when we're discussing or when we're dealing with the issues. That's the gap I'm going to shoot. That's the gap the bad guys are going to shoot, is how we are treating each other in the face of these issues. That creates the opportunity. And these leaders who are literally practicing what I call divisionism, the conscious act of dividing us into in-groups and out-groups to advance a narrow agenda. They're at the heart of it. You know, they're literally, they're complicit in assisting bad actors to tear us apart, man. And I just think it's going to be guys like you, honestly, in the coalitions that you're building and the networks that you're building and the platform that you're building, to just reach out to Americans to help us realize that we've got a hell of a lot more in common than we do apart. And frankly, I think there's an exhausted majority that's kind of sick of this. I think that we're just tired of it. And there's a real opportunity here for an upswing in how communities navigate this. I really believe it. I you know, you and I both work, I think, in that space, and I am convinced that we're on the edge of something here. Now, it could go either way, but I'm frankly optimistic. I know that sounds crazy, but I am.
I think I always am, no matter what. I am too, but I see it. I see how it's been hard to see people use, you know, narratives that are false or just emotionally driven, actually charged to just create more division. And it's like, oh man. And, you know, we're just not, you know, we're not built in a way to decipher that as much as others, right? Like some people can't do that. I feel I get it, but my mom doesn't. I feel like I'm trained for that, right?
And we have to help them. You know, we have to help. You know, this is where the real patience for leadership comes in. Is my mom's the same way. You know, and so how do you help? This was what we were actually taught as young Green Berets. Is when you're sitting in front of that elder that's got an AK-47 to the right arm and a cup of green tea to the left, right? How do you help that elder bring his emotional temperature down to such a degree that you have enough rapport, he just reaches for the tea and you keep talking, right? That's where I think we are, is we've got to help bring emotional temperature down to where people are ready to listen to one another. And it's going to take a lot of skill, man. It's going to take a lot of skill and a lot of work. But we can. It's going to be exhausting. And you know what? I think a lot of it's going to come from our veterans. I think our GWAT veterans are an amazing resource in helping us do this.
Yeah, I agree. You still have time, right? I know we went a little over because we're behind, but you have nothing lined up after this?
No, I'm good. We're fine.
Okay, I have a couple more questions real quick. So you've warned about strategic atrophy. Is that the right term? You use that, strategic atrophy?
I call it strategic paralysis. Honestly, it's less atrophy. I mean, there is some of that, you know, but it's hubris. It's hubris leads to paralysis, and hubris in this case being like institutional arrogance. This could never happen to us. We've got this figured out, you know. You see it everywhere.
Do you believe that's what we've done with the cartel all these years? Just kind of sat back and watched them play and never really did anything about it, and then all of a sudden now we're trying to combat it now, which might be a little too late. We might be, you know, they might have way too much power, way too much money.
Yeah. I mean, you know better than I do what these guys are capable of at a local level.
Yeah.
Right?
You know, there's no proof of, you know, being, I would say, corrupting our own high up in our government, but there's so much money that we've seen really good people, you know, or really trusted people in Mexico get corrupted just by way of, you know, the money. And so it's a concern. It's an interesting thing to see why we can't just go in and destroy them right away. Obviously, the Mexican president doesn't necessarily want to give us that power. Now, that could be a power thing. That could be just like, you know, we don't want to undermine her power, but it becomes very questionable why we haven't been able to really decipher it as fast as we know we could. If our American military needed to, they can go in and really take control.
I think they could. I think the only thing I would caution on this, and it's just part of the calculus, right, is I think what we talked about earlier, the second and third order effects of retribution would come at a scale that I don't know we've ever seen in this country. That, you know, I mean, I certainly saw in Colombia what happened to the families of Fuerzas Especiales and Comandos when they struck targets and were successful. And again, you gotta think about that too. You got to think about force protection. You got to think about, you know, families out of these operational places where our troops live. I mean, look, a lot of I'll give you an example, and this is not cartel, but it's right, the migration of TTPs. A lot of the chatter that we're hearing out of Al-Qaeda and other groups is retribution for the 20 years of the war affecting local fabric of society in Iraq and Afghanistan, being visited on the families and local fabric in the United States so that they feel what families felt at a local level over there. Right.
Whoa.
Yeah, man. And that's, to me, that's terrifying, because that is an incentive for local action that no one's talking about. Right. But it makes sense when you think about a 20-year war. Where did most of the impact happen in Afghanistan? It was in the rural areas. It was the rural areas. It was the farms. It was the apricot trees. It was the carezes that were covered up with dirt. Like, we broke a lot of shit, man. And granted, it's warfare, but tribal vengeance is ugly. And so imagine that times 10 on cartels just across the border. If their senior leaders start blowing up.
Yeah, and the thought is that there's so close proximity. And again, the same question of, if we cause havoc in Mexico, how many American or families in America are connected to that now are created, an ideology against America because we've just hurt some of their family by collateral damage of combat.
The piece is, like, we've got to consider all of that. It's all messaging. It's all holistic. There is no, in my assessment, there is no surgical strike or, Moab bomb that deals with this. You're dealing with secondary and tertiary effects that will have to be considered ahead of time, that involve messaging, that involve local engagement with families on the border, that involve force protection on the places where our troops operate, like a whole host of things. The money you talked about, the bribery, the corruption, it's a whole of nation full court press that is going to have to be deeply ingrained in our psyche, that the American people are up for that fight and that we're prepared for the scunion that's going to come from it. I'm just not hearing that conversation right now. I'm hearing a lot of chest thumping, but I don't know, man. I'm getting a little too long in the tooth for that. I would rather have conversation. If we're going to do it, fine, but let's have the full conversation about what this is going to require of us and our kids.
I mean, I didn't want to bring it up, but it's similar to like the whole ICE thing. I think everything that's happening with the ICE thing, I don't think the whole idea of it, the plan of it sounds on paper, immigration illegal, let's get them. But as the process was happening, it's caused so much civil unrest because of, the planning. But I don't think people realized the backlash that you would have in your communities would be this extreme. I think that the backlash is, they're using social media to combat it, like just the average civilian.
Remember what I said, how we treat each other around the issues versus the issue itself, right? Yeah. This is where the opportunity for the bad actors is. I'll give you another example. Within the ICE and immigration thing is the deportation or looming deportation of Afghan allies, right? And some of these guys came across the southern border because they were in severe duress and they came across that border. But these are vetted, proven allies of the United States. And just recently, an interpreter was scarfed up by ICE agents at his asylum hearing, right? And now nothing was communicated to the GWAT generation on this. That was one of the things when we went to DC right after the Trump administration took over. I sat in a very, very high ranking office and said, whatever your immigration policy is, we understand that like there's reporting of, Afghan bad actors and you got to do that. But please, communicate with the global war on terror veterans who fought with these guys for 20 years and whose mental health is directly tied to the safety of their allies, right? And if you just start rolling these guys up and tagging them and bagging them, you are going to ostracize an entire generation of warfighters. But I've seen nothing to me that tells me that they're communicating with our GWAT folks on immigration. And now you've got massive moral injury. I think you've lost a lot of these potential allies to the administration as a result of it. So it's just another example where, probably a well-intended policy is not the issue. It's how we treat each other around the issue that becomes the problem.
Man, Scott, I appreciate it, man. You've answered everything I had. And I love the direction we ended up going. Really insightful and, partly scary to think, right?
Yeah.
Of some of the things that could be happening coming down the road. If you don't mind, would you, if there's anything else you'd like to mention, please do. But I also want you to plug that book one more time for me.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's called The Gathering Storm, and you can get it on Amazon. It's honestly, I think what it really will help people do is it's designed actually to mitigate the fear and to just give some insights, because what we should be thinking about, in my mind, are private-public conversations between citizens and law enforcement and first responders and federal officials, state officials on, okay, if these planning assumptions are even remotely valid, the same way you would think about a hurricane, are we thinking about, groups of well-trained attackers in the United States taking over schools, daycares, hospitals, and how, as a private-public entity, could we deal with that? What would we do, for example, if ISIS fighters donned first responder uniforms in a city and just did what they did on October 7th? Because they've done it. There's a precedent for it. It just happened in Minnesota, where a guy donned a first responder uniform and, a big manhunt ensued. So he wasn't ideologically motivated for terrorism. But the point is, these TTPs are here. So that's what this book's about. It's honestly, I hope that it takes the fear out of it and just creates informed conversations for communities, law enforcement, first responders, and civic leaders to sit down and start talking about how the game has changed, and listen to a group of GWOT veterans who didn't even want to write the damn thing in the first place, but we feel a duty to report and a duty to warn. So it's The Gathering Storm, and you can find it on Amazon.
Awesome, Scott. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Vincent. Let's stay in touch, man.
Thank you for listening to Borderland Narcosis. I hope you guys enjoyed your time with us. Please don't forget to share and like, as well as don't forget First Form supplements. Don't forget to go to firstform.com/Borderland. And until next time, take care.